Rahmani there, which we are going to speak to in just a minute. Before we get to more of the details on this thread, though, let's get a little bit of a recap on what we're talking about here. Convicted killer Alec Murdaugh may get a new trial. The South Carolina Supreme Court has agreed to hear arguments in Murdaugh's appeal on alleged jury tampering. To help us break this down, we want to bring into the conversation again here legal analyst Neama Rahmani. Neama, good to see you once again. And first, I'd like to ask, what are your initial thoughts on this, the latest when it comes to the trial?
Well, Carol, thanks for having me as always. And I'm not surprised, even though the state Supreme Court of every state has discretionary jurisdiction, which means that they don't have to take every appeal. I'm not surprised they took the appeal in this case for a couple of reasons. One, it's probably one of the most gruesome and high-profile murders in South Carolina state history. But importantly, it's probably also one of the most egregious cases of jury tampering, if you believe the defense and the three jurors who submitted affidavits and testified that court clerk Becky Hill influenced their deliberation.
Let's continue by asking, how rare is it for a Supreme Court to take an appeals case like this one?
Very few percent of appeals are accepted by either the U.S. Supreme Court or state Supreme Court. So less than 10%, usually less than 5%. So the fact that they agreed to hear this case bodes well for Alec Murdaugh. You know, a recent infamous example was when the Pennsylvania Supreme Court agreed to hear the Bill Cosby appeal in that case. And of course, they ended up reversing. And I think here what happened is far worse because jury deliberations, they're supposed to be sacred. You're not supposed to have outside influences in that jury deliberation room. And here you have the clerk of the court who was affirmatively talking to jurors about the evidence, about Alec Murdaugh himself and his testimony, telling jurors don't believe him. And importantly, she may have been instrumental in removing one of the jurors from the panel, a juror that may have been pro-defense.
It seems that Murdaugh's attorneys may have some damning evidence that could help them with this appeal. Let's break down some of the arguments that we're going to hear going forward.
Well, I do think that what they're going to argue is that there was one specific juror, Juror Z, and this is someone that submitted an affidavit, and she testified not only that Hill tried to influence her, but that it actually affected her verdict. And that's prejudice under the law. When you have a juror that says, well, not only there was misconduct, it changed the way I voted. And we know, obviously, in a criminal case, that the verdict has to be unanimous. It has to be 12-0. So when you have a jury where multiple members say that this improper contact happened, and at least one juror that says that it influenced my vote, that's misconduct plus prejudice. That's grounds for a new trial, in my opinion. And frankly, I was surprised that the new judge in the case actually happened to be a retired South Carolina Supreme Court justice. I was surprised that she did not grant the motion for a new trial.
Neama, we're going to be filtering through some tweets because you have been following this very closely. If the murder conviction is overturned, how does this change things for Murdaugh? He is currently almost 3 years into that life sentence without parole.
I don't think it's going to change anything, practically speaking, and this is why. Let's not forget, even if the murder conviction is set aside and we have to go through a new trial, he admitted to massive amounts of fraud, stealing millions of dollars from clients. And he testified to the same in a state murder case. So he was prosecuted both stateside and by the feds for stealing money from clients. And he's doing decades in prison, about 40 years. So Alec Murdaugh is going to die in South Carolina prison, regardless of what happens in this murder case, because again, he's doing so much time for the fraud and because of his advanced age and some health issues.
So tell me, if this won't change things in a practical sense, what is the incentive by Murdaugh and his team to even bring this appeal forward?
Well, if you believe Alec Murdaugh, he has told the entire world and he's testified that he stole money from clients and he admitted doing so. He blames drug problems, but he has sworn up and down that he did not kill his wife and his son. And he wants to preserve his legacy and his reputation for his surviving son. So apparently that's the motivation here. Obviously his Attorneys want to defend the case because they too believe that he's not guilty. But even though it's not going to make any difference in terms of the sentence and where Alec Murdaugh is going to spend the rest of his life, at least according to him, it matters whether he's a convicted murderer or just a fraudster.
Neama, as I mentioned before, you have been following this very closely. Tell me, based on someone that really studies this and dedicates their life to the law, why are you following this so closely? What interests you so much about this appeal?
Well, what interests me is really Alec Murdaugh, probably one of the most storied legal families in South Carolina. His father, his grandfather, there were lawyers, there were prosecutors. I think my grandfather's portrait or painting was in the courthouse. They had to take it down for this murder case. So this is legal royalty there in South Carolina. But importantly, really, and I talked about the cardinal sin, a lawyer that steals money from clients. And we're dealing with this right now in my hometown of California, Los Angeles, California, where Tom Girardi, probably the most prominent plaintiff's lawyer in the state, is now facing federal charges and is on trial for stealing millions of dollars from clients. And of course, some folks who are a little bit younger may know him better as the person who was married to Erica Jane of the Real Housewives. I know him, of course, as the lawyer that was represented by the Julia Roberts movie, Aaron Brockovich. So here's someone who's pretty high profile. And these are two individuals on two different coasts who are being prosecuted for doing the worst to their clients, stealing money from sick, dead, injured, and infirm clients.
The case of attorney Tom Girardi is something else that we are following here at Live Now. So, yes, how you mentioned it, these attorneys that really are prolific and the crimes that they have been accused and convicted of, that does certainly cause an interest, I'm sure, especially amongst attorneys like yourself. Neama, one more question. What are you most looking forward to as we continue to follow this appeals process for Murdaugh? What do you have your eye on?
I have my eye on oral arguments. So now that the case has been accepted for appeal, the parties are going to submit their briefs and they're going to argue before those justices. And just like the U.S. Supreme Court, sometimes you can tell which direction the justices are leaning based on the questions that they're answering the attorneys during those arguments. I'm going to be paying close attention because, like I said, I was surprised Murdaugh didn't get a new trial. Now I think if I were a betting man, I think it's even more likely that the justices grant this request based on the decision to take on this appeal. But I'm going to reserve judgment until that oral argument. I think we'll know a lot more then.
Attorney Neama Rahmani, thanks so much for joining us again to discuss these appeal process for Alec Murdaugh. And well, we might check in with you soon as well as we follow the case against Tom Girardi. But we appreciate your time today. Take care.
Thanks, Grail. Thanks for having me.